Now, let me introduce you to the session you've been waiting for. Why machine learning is the next frontier for art. Our next speaker, Hugo, explores how machine learning can revolutionize the art industry through determining value of a piece or longevity of an artist's career. Please give it up for Hugo Liu.
Hi, South by. Thanks so much for having me. Let me just log into my computer. Yes, so my name is Hugo Liu. I work at an art online marketplace called Artsy. I'm the chief scientist. I'm very happy to be with you today to tell you about why machine learning is the next frontier for art. So this is a painting called Salvator Mundi by Leonardo da Vinci, painted around, we think, the year 1500. And in November of last year, this canvas was sold at Christie's in New York City at auction. It was lot number 9. The bidding opened at $70 million, and there was already a lot of frenzy because the work was guaranteed to sell for $100 million. There were a steady pace of bids at $95 million, $110 million, $120 million, and then gasps were heard across the room as the price hit $200 million. At that point, this work had already overtaken Picasso's work from 2015 sale that sold for a record $179 million at auction. So this had already become the most valuable work ever sold at auction. The auction started with 5 bidders, and from $220 million and higher, the bidders were just 2, and both of them were calling in on the phone. And bidding moved up in $2 to $3 million increments, all the way up from $220 million to $370 million. And then the next bid that was heard was $400 million, and the room went crazy. And that was it. The auction lasted 19 minutes, and selling with fees, of course, because this is art, $450 million. This was the most expensive work ever sold at auction, and maybe ever sold in the world, but we can't know that for sure because of how the art world works. This raises some very interesting questions I'd like to address with you today. How can one piece be worth such a high price? What determines an artwork's value? And what forces set the price of art? Together in this talk, we'll paint a picture of the art world to answer these questions. And then we'll stretch our imagination just a little bit further to ask, can a machine algorithmically determine the value of art? What are we looking at? This is actually a map. This is what maps are to computer scientists sometimes. It's a map of the stylistic tastes of French society in the 1970s. It's a little bit, well, it's impossible for you to see, so I'll point it out here. But in the left box on the graph is a representation of the tastes of artistic producers and people of higher education. And they tend to prefer artists like Picasso, Dali, and Braque. And in the center box, that represents the tastes of the more mainstream professions. And this cohort, they preferred, in the 1970s French society, Van Gogh and Renoir. This map is a beautiful work of a French sociologist, Pierre Bourdieu, that I'm very excited to mention to many of you as the first time. He pioneered the use of geometric data analysis on social data in the 1960s. Why is this exciting? The math used in Pierre Bourdieu's work is now one of the most popular machine learning techniques in use today, something called latent semantic analysis, latent semantic indexing. My taste research is a descendant of Pierre Bourdieu as well. I did my work on computational sociology at the MIT Media Lab, and I have a PhD in computer models of taste. So after my PhD, I went on to help build a taste prediction startup called Hunch, and more recently, I co-founded a machine learning for art startup called Art Advisor. We use machine learning to forecast and nowcast the art market, and the goal was to create a Zillow for art. last spring we were acquired by Artsy, which is the largest online art marketplace. And I joined as chief scientist. In short, my work has been asking and answering questions about taste for about 2 decades. What is taste? How do we predict it? And for the art market, how do we put a value on taste? Let's start with a short lesson about the art market. So how many of you have ever been to an art fair? Show of hands, please. Okay, good, that's why you're here. Amazing. So what's the workflow of the art market? The most basic workflow is direct selling. Artists, they make works, they sell them directly to collectors. And tools these days like Instagram and inviting clients into your studio for a studio visit, they're very popular direct marketing techniques. But when we hear the phrase the art market, there's usually other institutions involved. This is the primary market workflow. So here, galleries, they are the tastemakers and the kingmakers of an artist's career. When a top gallery decides to represent an artist, that event alone elevates the art market for that artist. Galleries, they help artists to develop their collector base. They also they work hard, sometimes very hard, to grow an artist's reputation by placing the works of the artist into the hands of influential collectors and also placing their works into museums as museum exhibitions. So galleries, they do a lot of things. They also are the underwriters of the market. They help to make the market for an artist. They set the prices for an artist's artwork to ensure that they can sell. And what's interesting about the primary market in art is that, unbelievably, all the prices are private, and many times the prices paid are closely guarded secrets. The secondary market is what we call anything when an artist gets resold. So mostly, because art is quite valuable, most artworks of really high value are resold through a public auction, such as at Christie's and Sotheby's. And here, even galleries are sometimes seen as the active buyers at auctions. That's because galleries do their best to pull their artists out of auction. For artists that are living and are represented by a gallery, the gallery really has nothing to gain by having the works appear at auction. It's very easy to lose control over prices, and that could potentially hurt or harm the career of the artist. But for the works of artists that are in the secondary market, and especially for works of artists that are no longer living in the secondary market, the auctions generate a very important data point, which is public prices. And auctions are truly the primary price discovery mechanism for the entire art world. So how concentrated is the art market? The art market is more concentrated than you may think. So the outer circle says 3 million, and that's an estimate by some estimates of how many professional fine artists there are in the world today. Of these, we see at least some data coverage about 300,000 artists, the next ring in. And these artists we have some exhibition history for, some gallery representation information for. But of these 300,000 artists, only 30,000 artists do we have some really thick data for. We have extensive exhibition histories. We know about the placement of their works into museum and private collections. And then further rarefied from this, there's another power of 10 in, which is there's about 3,000 artists who can be considered to have highly liquid auctions markets, which means that their works trade frequently at auction. And this is important because for 3,000 artists, we now have the thick financial data points that we might need to produce like a good picture of the value of that artist and their works. And further of these, there's only about 300 artists who are famous or celebrity status to most households. So in our culture, art is as important as fashion and technology and finance. Many of you have been to art fair. But as far as the art market is concerned, we're still in the very early innings. So there's a huge discrepancy between art and culture and the art market. And there's plenty of exciting growth ahead for the art market. Art is just beginning, first of all, to come online. It's a very old-fashioned industry. And art is just beginning to meet the data revolution that's already transformed every other consumer industry. It's a very exciting time. How big is the art market? The estimates vary from $45 to $65 billion per year. And that's pretty big, except next to two other markets. By comparison, the art market is quite small. The middle circle is the personal luxury goods market, which includes fashion, apparel, beauty, and luxury cars, which is surprisingly, astonishingly, $553 billion a year. So a lot of growth ahead. You think, okay, well, there's got to be a lot of wealthy people that own art. What fraction of wealthy individuals collect art? This diagram shows, according to Capgemini, there were 17 million high net worth individuals in 2017. A high net worth individual has about $1 million or more in liquid investable assets. Only a very small fraction of this cohort that can afford to buy art actively collects art. The low estimate is ranging from less than 0.1%, written up in the New York Times just last year, to 2% of this total group are active collectors of art. And I think one major reason is art is not a very well understood carrier of value. It's not a very well understood asset class. According to the Deloitte Finance survey from a few years ago, art appraisal and valuation technologies was the most clamored for service by collectors. By 67% of collectors wanted some access to valuation technologies. Okay, how often does art trade? So like art, real estate is a good comparison because in real estate, it's also quite an involved process with high fees to buy and sell real estate. But houses, they turn over on average in this country between 5 to 7 years. By comparison, and think in part due to the opacity of the art market, of the 3 million artists and only 3,000 having liquid public auctions, artworks turn over once every 30 years or more. This is a huge discrepancy and opportunity to trade art more often. As we said, art is as culturally important as fashion, technology, and finance. There's a lot of interest in art. According to the American Association of Museums, there were approximately 850 million visits each year to American museums. That's more visits than to all major league sporting events and theme parks combined. For the most part, this museum-going audience hasn't been commercially activated. There's 3,000 artists who are liquid at auction. They're very famous, established artists, but their works are not quite affordable for most people. If we can help to create visible liquid markets for a wider set of artists, we can activate the museum-going audience by giving them access to art that they can afford. So if we could activate just 5% of museum visits and generate a $1,000 sale, like a limited edition print from 5%, that would already double the entire size of the existing art market. In short, there's plenty of growth ahead for the art market. Art is already as culturally significant as fashion, technology, finance. And it really stands to benefit from a data revolution, using data to explain why art is valuable and why a broader set of artists are valuable. So we want technology to help us answer what's art worth and why is it worth that. If we can answer this question, we'll throw sunshine on the marketplace. How do we value art? Okay, so down to the meat and potatoes. Is the art's value in the image? In the Mona Lisa, for example, we know that her smile is an uncanny quality that many see as central to the image's power. And it's definitely true that images can fascinate us. This is an image here generated by Deep Dream, which was a neural network algorithm created by a Google engineer. And it's truly fascinating or disturbing, depending on who you are. But it shows us that the image is really powerful. And there's been a lot of academic research, for example, on quantifying images. This image is more beautiful than that image. This image is more influential than the other image. So using computer vision, some researchers in 2015 have predicted a painting's style and artistic influences from just the image. The same researchers were able to measure how creative a painting was based upon the image, and scoring how and predicting how influential that image might be to future artists. But images don't capture a lot of what art is, especially contemporary art, which is often conceptual. This is a very famous work. How many of you know what it is? Hands? Okay. This is a work called Fountain, 1917, by Marcel Duchamp, who is the father of conceptual art. He created quite a stir, to put it mildly, when with his work in a series called Ready Made, he placed ordinary objects on pedestals in a museum setting. So this is a urinal placed on its back in a museum. And it created the sensation then. I think it still creates a sensation today by raising questions about what art is. But like it or not, this is art. So for conceptual art, the value is clearly not in the image. So where can we think about where the value is located? Because if we can't articulate that, a machine could never find it. Conceptual art can be thought of as art interventions into culture. They spark debate on purpose, create conversation on purpose. How can we value art that even includes conceptual art in the definition? Well, first, we have to kind of put on our Jedi glasses and see that an artwork is more than an object. An artwork is a story. It's a production packaged as a story. The story, of course, includes the object. That's the main starring role of the story. But it also includes like a motley crew of other characters. And it includes, for example, all the tastemakers that have ever curated, vouched for, liked, endorsed, or connected with the artwork. It includes the museums that exhibits that artwork, the galleries that sell it, the major collectors and their tastes. If you go into an art gallery to buy art, you'll hear a 30-second elevator pitch about all the great things about that work of art, all the important hands that artwork has touched, and all the recognition it's touched. And that truly is part of the artwork. So together, this art production is like a Hollywood blockbuster. So sometimes before you even screen a movie, you can know something about whether or not it will be successful based on who's involved. And together, the art production makes a cultural impact. So this is the art production making a cultural impact. Sorry, you can't read this. Importantly, it's also hard to measure the value of the artwork object, but we can measure the art production's value by scoring the involvement of the various players, the tastemakers, and so forth. We can measure the cultural impact that the artwork and artists together make upon society, because that manifests as conversations, spectacle, audience, art history, mythology, symbols. It's all created from art. Art is a production that produces culture, in short. The value of art increases as its production value increases and as its cultural impact grows. So how do we measure things like production value and cultural impact? It's a perfect, when you don't know what to do, it's a perfect problem for machine learning. Well, you kind of have to know what to roll that back halfway. So there are hundreds of factors that could factor into buying art. For example, the awards that the artist has accomplished, the genre of the work, all about the shows, whether or not that work has achieved some kind of art historical recognition. What else do we have on here? Teaching posts, education degrees, lineage, artistic style, work scarcity, the hammer price versus the estimate price. There's a lot of factors that could contribute to art prices. And machine learning helps us to sort out what actually contributes. So what do we find at ArtAdvisor about what contributes to the long-term value of an artist? We found that the most predictive signal of value is institutional support. That's an artist's museum exhibition history and the artist's achievement of museum permanent collections. And that makes sense because these institutions are really good at seeing the value in art. So by simply measuring their engagement, we can measure the importance of artworks. Second most predictive signal is gallery representation. So as I said before, a gallery sheds a lot of light and color upon an artist. Some galleries are really prescient. They're really good at picking winners and losers for at least a decade at a time. Other galleries are really influential, and just by endorsing an artist, representing an artist, they help to galvanize the art world support for an artist. Other value signals include critical reception, which is how artists do in the press, and auction performance, and placement, which is where the artwork ends up in whose hands. Many artists are now collected by very famous celebrity collectors that they themselves function like galleries by being important and valuable tastemaker signal. So there's also evidence for a dominant taste in art. We haven't talked a lot about the artwork itself, but just to spend one slide on it, a 50 by 60 oil on canvas is a very well liked and cherished format in the art world, and it probably sells at a desirability premium because people want to display and hang that. It hangs very well, it looks very beautiful, it's durable. And if we can represent the desirability, for example, of certain mediums as currency exchange rates, oil would be $1, right? And comparing to that, how much would you pay for the same work if it were works on paper and pen? 50 cents. And how much would you pay for the same work if it were a photograph? 39 cents. And so on and so forth. And sculptures tend to be more expensive. Going back to the artist, though, because, again, the artist value does dominate the value of artwork. The cultural signals that explain an artist's value can be explained by this data iceberg. So imagine all the things that contribute, all the cultural signals that contribute to the value of an artist. We arrange them into an iceberg, and together all the signals in the iceberg represent the value of the artist. So the point of arranging them in an iceberg is that above the water are clearly visible signals of value. Most people will recognize, everyone in this room certainly, will recognize that a MoMA solo show or a $1 million work at auction means that the artist is established, recognized, and valued. However, these signals only touch a few thousand artists. So the art professionals have a leg up on all of us because to them, there are many more legible signals. For example, in the next layer, just beneath the water, representation of an artist by a blue chip gallery like Larry Gagosian or David Zwarner, who helped to underwrite and support the market. Winning prizes like the Turner Prize, which is a prestigious British art award that canonizes artists just by awarding the prize. And also a catalog raisonné is like an art historical catalog of all the works by an artist. And artists that achieve art historical significance, well, they attract the attention and the hard work it takes to put together such a catalog. So the ability to read these signals, so they're going through their newsfeed and seeing all the things that are happening in the art world, and because they read many more signals than the top layer, they understand the value and potential in many more artists, tens of thousands of artists. What would be super valuable is, imagine if we could build a secret decoder that gives this ability to everyone. The deepest part of the iceberg maybe contains value signals that are beyond even art world professionals. They're data insights that we can get from machine learning because machine learning is really good at deep pattern recognition that's unconscious to most people. For example, artist prices should grow, but they should not grow too quickly, as that can create a disturbance in the artist's career. Graduating from certain art schools in certain years is a signal, and also certain galleries contribute more value to their artists because they empirically are shown to move the artist's career further. So importantly, at this bottom layer, these signals cover hundreds of thousands of artists. What if we could deploy this kind of signal analysis to the whole market instead of what is currently available? Today, the efficient pricing mechanism of public auctions, they only touch a fraction of the art market. They only touch 3,000 artists. So they're kind of like above the iceberg. And using machine learning models that feed off of these deep signals, we can create price visibility for hundreds of thousands of artists by using cultural signals as proxies for price signals. We can create products like robo-appraisals of artworks. We can use data insights to assist in merchandising. And imagine being able to understand the objective value of almost any artwork you see for sale, including artworks by artists who have never had a public price associated with their career. That is within reach. Just to zoom out a little bit, the impact on the art world, So we already established that art is as significant as fashion, technology, finance in today's cultural conversation. 850 million museum visits to American museums a year. But the opacity of the art world has kept many buyers on the sidelines. It's not because they don't love art. People love art. You love art. I love art. Potential buyers just want to understand that for this very emotional decision of something that's rather expensive, that the object that they fell in love with has established value. We think that the machine learning techniques that we described earlier and others using cultural signals will help us to revolutionize how the art industry communicates value to art buyers. And we'll think this will open the doors to greater participation in the art market. So impact on the world more broadly. Let's zoom out again, because many of you have lives that don't involve art. How can we take away a lesson from this? I'd like to share with you this thought, which is that art is valuable because it produces culture. We've shown that. Imagine if we could, like we're trying to do in art, quantify the monetary value of culture more generally. So we'd be able to look at musicians and see their cultural value, poets and their cultural contribution, creative entrepreneurs and their cultural productivity. If we can help to shed light on their cultural value, we can improve the flow of capital to the long tail of culture makers. That's the society that we're moving into. And we can create better support for artists, musicians, poets, creative entrepreneurs at the long tail. We can produce a virtuous cycle of capital that feeds those that feed us. And they're helping to elevate the human condition for all of us. Thank you. So I'd be happy to take your questions or comments, or let's start a conversation because we have a lot of time left. You can just queue up behind the mics.
Hey, thank you for your talk. I was just wondering, by creating such a data-driven model, don't you think somehow you're also creating some sort of canvas that orientate artists' work? For instance, you were talking about the fact that a 50 by 60 painting was selling great, while I do believe artists stand away from the rule, and that's why we love them, and that's why they contribute to culture, and they should never be forced to enter one model to make more money or to make the world more visible, because, I mean, that's what we expect from artists as a consumer of art, so to say. I expect that from them, not to abide by a model.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I've sat on a few, thank you for your question. I've sat on a few panels on algorithmic bias, for example. We know the example of the Facebook newsfeed, and we know the danger of echo chambers and filter bubbles. And as technologists, it's up to us to be responsible about this. However, just having the data available as a mirror to society is valuable because it reflects things that are already happening, I think. But we do need to be very responsible in how we apply this. I think that the counteracting benefit of this is because many more artists, the long tail of artists, produce culture signals. And because we have ways to value those culture signals, we're able to direct much more patronage and dollars and attention to that underserved artist producer audience. So I think maybe there's some trade-offs there.
Hi.
Please.
Hi, I have a question. I'm not an artist by any means, but I want to ask.
Can you step closer? Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not an artist by any means, but I want to ask, what is the scope of the art that you claim that ML, that machine learning can estimate the value? Like, what's the scope? Because arts is a very broad, has many different forms, and how do you use ML to recognize the shape, the texture, the colors, and
yes.
Some senses I think is very intuitive to human, and how do you use the algorithm to identify those? Yes.
Thank you. So thank you for your question. The question is, what's the scope of what machine learning can value in art? Because art comes in many different forms and textures, is that right?
Yes.
Yes. So I think the reason I showed the value in the image is that just by analyzing the image, you can get some insights, but the approach that we're advocating is looking at how people engage with art. That's a little more bulletproof because we have faith that people are others, especially those in the art world with good tastes, are able to help lead us toward interesting narratives and interesting works. And so the scope of this machine learning proposal is very broad. And it can include any artists who have been recognized or curated in any way. Like eventually, let's say we got Facebook to agree to give us data to Instagram. We could look at Instagram and do audience analytics and see that certain people who are very good at impression, at predicting promising artists, that they're engaging with artworks, and we can follow more about the artists that they're interested in. So the scope of this is, because we're not measuring the artwork directly, we're measuring the reaction to the artwork and how others engage with it. It's quite robust. Thank you.
I have a second question, if you don't mind. And just out of curiosity, what is the ranking of the artwork that you showed us earlier? Like, how does that rank with the machine learning algorithm, the one sold for $450 million?
Sorry, I think that I didn't hear the whole question, but I heard.
Yeah. My question is, what's the ranking of the artwork you just showed us at the very beginning? What's the rank of it from the?
Oh, the Da Vinci work.
Yes. I'm just out of curiosity.
Well, Da Vinci is. Sorry, we didn't close the loop on that. The Da Vinci is a very important artist, and the artwork sold for many reasons. Some of them are cultural, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that this work by Da Vinci, the Salvator Mundi, was the only work that was for sale of like 10 works out there. So there is a very constrained market, and so there's even supply forces like positional goods and Veblen goods theories that apply to this work.
Yeah, my question is, what is the rank using the
What is the rank?
Yeah, what's the value produced from
I don't know offhand, but
Okay.
very high.
Okay,
Yes,
cool.
thank you.
Hello, great talk, I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I have a two-part question. The first one comes from a more data science perspective. Like, I understand that you are trying to learn the consumption, and you're
Yes.
trying to see how people consume art.
Yes.
But what are the biases that your models are concerned about here? Because you can end up learning those biases as well, and you don't, maybe that's not desirable. So would you also focus on content-based evaluation? So just looking at the artwork itself, is that something that's exciting to you, or do you see potential there? And the second part would be that you brought up that deep dream picture. That's super exciting for me, at least.
Yes.
So there's deep dream, there's pix-to-pix, and now generative adversarial networks are coming up with more high-definition art pieces. Where do you see the future of that? How does that fit into this whole global picture of machine learning and art?
Yes. I mean, we live in the age of plurality, so I think it all makes sense to do. I think there's a lot. The question was, well, what are the biases of this approach? Should we also look at content-based evaluation metrics for art? It's a good question, a thoughtful question. Definitely looking at the image is very interesting, novel, and we should continue to do it. The biases of this model are clearly the analysis is biased toward artworks that generate data that the algorithm wants to consume. So the data the algorithm wants to consume are things like exhibition histories, placements, and there's an inherent bias away from artists that are producing works that we don't have any data on. So they're just happening in the dark. Some artists are perhaps very successful avoiding actually a really good friend of mine produces very good art that doesn't really hit museums or institutions, but really excite people, sell for very robust prices, and that's in the dark, it's in the data dark, right? But I think we should always give our methodology when we're producing evaluations like this, and we should always aim to improve the methodology. For example, if we got analytics from Instagram, we could add a new layer and dimension to data signals, and there are always ways to improve upon the model like that. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. I have a couple of questions. I apologize if you answered this in the talk. It's about the iceberg thing, and I'm wondering, do you train your models based on auction data?
Yes.
And do you have any price data that comes from lower price points? Because I would imagine that's all pretty high up. And do you expect the models that apply to the top of the iceberg to also apply, I'm thinking you do, to the bottom?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There's so many different ways to tell the story with data. The data, the exchange rates between the medium was done using all art prices, taking geometric averages to compensate for the large discrepancies between art ranges. But I think definitely if, for example, we wanted to produce an infographic to help artists understand the market value of their works, we should stratify the infographic by price points. We should say, here's the infographic for limited edition artworks under $50,000 and just show a subset. So when you cut data into different cohorts and different subsets, you can get very different results. For this particular example of medium, it looks the same across all the different price granularities.
Okay, I guess my question is then, where do you get the data for the lower price points if it's not public?
So yes, you're right. So at art auctions, there are evening auctions where there are very expensive works sold, and then there are day auctions where there are more inexpensive works sold, and there are also online-only auctions that have like Paddle8 and others that have lower price point artworks. But there's a very healthy auctions market for lower price point artworks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Well, I have a question. You sharply noticed that the art collectors, they usually purchase art from the influential art galleries, and these galleries, they basically influence the market. So by having this, I think it's an awesome project. It's just that you are somehow trying to break the trend in the market, let us, the normal population who doesn't own $1 million or several $1 million, establish the value of art before they actually go to the influential galleries. I'm just trying to see what you're trying to do and what's going on inside the art market at the moment.
Yes, thank you. So what we're trying to do is, 90% of the market for living artists is in the primary market, and those are opaque. So you would, let's say, where do you live? What city do you live in?
Tokyo.
Tokyo?
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. I was just in Tokyo. And it's very expensive in Tokyo. But you wouldn't buy an apartment in Tokyo without looking at comps, real estate comps. So how can we expect people to buy very expensive works without having some kind of price references? So that's the problem we're trying to solve for. And we think that the artists that are least likely to have price references are those living artists in the primary market. And we think we can serve them a lot better by shedding light and say, hey, look over here. There's a lot of value over here. We gave you a secret decoder ring. You can now see things that you couldn't see before. So that's our intention.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So back to your
Hey,
Zillow.
Ted.
Hey.
This is one of my co-authors
Yeah.
for a paper that we were just in Tokyo to present.
So we have the Zillow thing, and in the property in real estate, there's like the commercial, and there's the retail, and there's so many different ways that things are sold. And then there's these developers, and there's architects. There's a gigantic array of parts to it, kind of like an iceberg. And I guess what I'm dreaming of is I know so many people that are so sad that wanted to be artists and did beautiful craft. Do you see, the disintermediation that's happened over the last 25 years as a path towards more artists or more appreciation of art relative to the people down underneath the iceberg, or do you think that it's pretty much the top, part that's frothy that you're working with right now?
Yeah, thanks, Ted. good question. The disintermediation is real. There are a lot of artists that are successful on Instagram and through studio visits. There are a lot of artists that are successful because they're very good at using the social media tools and the marketing tools that are present today that were absent a decade ago, and using these tools to totally avoid exhibitions dealing with galleries and other parts of the art world, the established art world. And I think, if anything, this should be a clarion call to the traditional art market to modernize and open its doors, because otherwise it will become disintermediated. But this is a way to open the doors, because there's lots of rich culture and history already in the established art world. Thank you.
That's funny. It's actually a segue to what I was going to ask is, you know, you kind of led to the bigger picture. Then we could kind of know what is the value of culture, basically. And,
Yes.
and you know, then can we influence our governments to invest more and make it more important in schools? So I thought that was cool. Sorry. Thank you for the talk. I actually am from the music part, and I think it's super interesting that, you know, I want to go back to that slide and look at everything that you think adds value, but does that get skewed from culture? Like, I mean, Instagram doesn't have the same footprint here as it does anywhere else in the world, so I'd like to hear you on that. Are you using different, you know, weights for those things?
Absolutely, a great question. Is that skewed? There's a very famous quote that's beautiful, applies here, which is, the map is not the territory, right? So any kind of data is a representation of the truth, but we can't access the truth directly. The proposal here is to take one step forward and say, let's go from not doing anything to a representation that makes a good faith effort to represent the market, knowing that there will be skew, but it's an evolutionary process, and I think taking the first step will you know, unlock a lot of interest and value, and then we can take the next steps. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for your talk. It was really interesting.
Thank you.
I just have a practical question about...
Could you step closer?
Sure. Just my question is practical in nature. It's basically, I'm just wondering how this will manifest, if it'll be, you know, a separate part of Artsy where you can go and if you have a piece of art, figure out what its value is, or if you think it's going to be a completely different website, or maybe not an auction, but something similar to that you can use to find value in your own pieces of art, and kind of how Artsy would be involved with that in the future.
Thank you. And Artsy's mission is to make every work of art accessible online. So we have that mission of opening access to the art market and to artworks in general. Because Artsy acquired Art Advisor, Artsy thinks that this kind of analysis can really help to further open up and grow the art ecosystem. So how it will manifest is, currently we've already taken steps for a subset of artists in Artsy. If you go to artworks, you'll see that, oh, that's interesting, this artist has works that are already in the Tate or in the MoMA. And we don't realize that the MoMA, for example, has collected the works of tens of thousands of artists, and they have hundreds of thousands of works in their collection. And just knowing that you're interested in something that the MoMA already owns is a form of, I think, insight-assisted merchandising. And so that's what we're starting, and we're going to grow from there. Thank you.
Hi, it was an amazing session. Thanks for that. Thanks also for the unlimited Q&A. And I would like to ask you, if I understand, you were talking about some, from a global perspective. Do you have or have you run a test based on geographically, on location, on development markets, like maybe in Argentina where I came from, and also have you run the system or this kind of studies based on some kind of art, and let's say electronic art or new media art, and if you did, which were the results?
Thank you. We haven't run many formal experiments, but we've run many informal experiments On the geography of art, you know, the largest art markets are New York and London, and there are then other markets that are also quite large aside from that. So there's so much data in the art world. There's so much data, and our intention is to go through to build representations and ways to communicate value to people that people understand and want to see and feel engaged by, and that are valid statistically. So sorry I'm not skirting your question, it's just we don't have any formal things to cite and talk about. Thank you. Thank you so much for all your questions and for being here. I understand that this point of South by, it's hard to be in a room for an hour. So thank you so much. I appreciate your patronage and happy to engage with you off the stage. Thank you.